All right, we're back for another workshop. Hope you guys enjoyed this past Sunday as we got into the first step of Bible study methods. The last couple of workshops have been laying out the plan, the process, giving you some resources in place so that you can have everything that you need to do the steps of Bible study methods. But this past week, we actually started to get to work. So if you have not watched Sermon 3 or Week 3 in our hermeneutic series, don't watch this workshop. Go back and watch that sermon so you can really pick up the process, the rules, looking at terms, understanding how observation works. What I want to do in this workshop, shouldn't take us too long today. I'm not going to, again, give you any more resources. We're going to just start to practice what we learned on Sunday, is I want to give you one final little thing to put on your hand for observation skills, and then I want to just work on observation, practice it, except we're going to go to a little bigger passage. Instead of a verse, we're going to do a paragraph. And everything you do in observation with a verse, you can do in a paragraph, you can do in a chapter, you can do in a book. Now, as you get in larger sections of Scripture, it's going to be more important to sort of collate all of your observations so that you can get the big picture, see how it all is organized and works together. And so in the weeks ahead, we'll start to talk about charts and then correlation and things like that. So if you remember on Sunday, we drew an outline of our hand and wrote words on the fingers so that you can, as you're reading your Bible, sort of think through, okay, am I picking up everything I need to pick up from the passage? And we looked at things that were emphasized. We looked at things that were repeated. We looked at things that were related. We looked at things that were alike and unalike. And in the middle of your hand, on the palm, I would put things that are true to life. I didn't have you write that on Sunday. Probably could have, but we did a little bit of that on Sunday. Remember when we talked about imagining and putting ourselves in the text? Meaning that we're not reading into the text, but we're experiencing what the people, the event, the story is experiencing as we read it. You need to be careful that you don't superimpose our culture and our geography and our customs into the text that aren't there. But these are real-life people that we're dealing with. This really happened. They're humans. And we're humans, and we feel same emotions, and we experience life and respond to life and God and one another in similar ways. So without putting yourself into the text to which you're misreading it, it's still helpful to put yourself there. And so to illustrate that, go to 2 Timothy chapter 4. This is the Apostle Paul writing to a young pastor, his protege, his disciple, person he's very close with, named Timothy. And if you were to look at a Bible introduction or look at a Bible dictionary, I'll spare you doing that now, you would discover that this is the Apostle Paul's final letter that we have preserved for us in the New Testament, that he is writing from prison in Rome, that he is soon to die. He knows he's soon to die. In chapter 4, verse 6, he says, I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good faith. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Henceforth, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And so he knows he's dying. Or getting ready to die. He is giving his final charge, his final words to a person who's very close to him. And so here we go. Imagine that. You're writing to your son or your daughter or your best friend or your spouse or a protege in your business or your faith. And you are going to impart to them some very important truths, some final words. If you had time to plan them and write them and think about them, you would make sure that these were priorities, that these were essentials. And so 2 Timothy is that kind of a letter. And 2 Timothy is interesting in that you can pick up the key and the emotion to the letter by reading the end first. See if you can feel the world of Paul as he ends his letter. He says, "Do your best to come to me soon. For Demas, in love with this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Luke alone is with me." Down here in verse 16, he says, "At my first defense, no one came to stand by me, but all deserted me." Second time he said deserted him. So what are you feeling in light of those words? He feels abandoned. He feels betrayed. He feels alone. He's lonely. He's isolated. He's emotionally feeling left behind. He's used to being out there on the front lines. He says that all these people have gone out in ministry, and here he is. He's bound up. And the people that he thought were with him aren't with him. Kind of smile. Luke alone is with me. Luke's all I got. And I guess Luke's not great to have all by himself. He says, "Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful to me for ministry." Now, if you know your context and your correlation, and you know the book of Acts, you know that Paul took John Mark, this Mark here, on a ministry trip with him. And when it got tough, Mark deserted him. He went home. He got homesick. "This is too tough. This is too hard. I'm leaving." And so in Mark's past and his history with Paul, he has on his resume a desertion. And the next time Paul goes out on a ministry trip, he doesn't want to take Mark with him. And Barnabas wanted to take Mark with him. That was his cousin. And Paul said no. And they had such a divide and disagreement over that Barnabas took Mark and went one way and Paul went the other. And that's in their past. And so I read in that Paul's sort of wanting to make amends for that. Maybe even regrets that he was a little too hard on Mark. And so he says, "Get Mark and bring him with you. For he's very useful to me. I don't want him to think of me as thinking he's useless because of that desertion and that I don't love him and I don't care about him. In fact, bring him here. I want to say some things to Mark that perhaps I should have said by now." So he's feeling regret as well as loneliness. "When you come, bring the cloak that I left with you left with Carpus at Troas." What's that tell you? It's cold. It's damp in a dungeon. It's cool there where he's at. So bring my coat, also the books, and above all the parchments. So he's bored. Parchments would have been the scriptures. He's not done reading. He's not done studying. He's not done observing and interpreting and applying and correlating. Love it. So you get just a little bit just there of how you can enter the text and feel it and emote and smell it and hear it and see it and taste it and enter into it. So put on that palm, look for things that are true to life. All right, now turn from 2 Timothy and go to Nehemiah. That's your Old Testament. Look in the table of contents. If you don't know where the book is, this is in the section of historical books. Remember that. Oh, by the way, I realized in my ADD and thinking quicker than I can speak that I left off Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther as the last three books of the historical section. And I didn't. I said it stopped at Ezra, I think. And I left poor old Nehemiah and Esther out. My daughter pointed that out to me. So those books go in the historical section of your divisions in your table of contents. You probably figured that out. Now, when you get to Nehemiah, we're going to look at the first 4 verses of chapter 1. I'll start reading verse 4 so we can, again, practice picking up context and understanding how to read the verses before and after. But we'll cover the first 4 verses, which really set the setting of the book as a whole. He says, as soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, and I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. Now, what do? As soon as. That little phrase triggers as soon as a question. As soon as what? And I heard these words. What words? And I sat down. Who's I? So you got to go back. So you could put an arrow in verse 4 up to the first 3 verses that give you the setting. Well, the words, verse 1, of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. So that's who is writing. That's the I who heard these words, and I sat down. And he tells us he's the son of Hakaliah, which is helpful because there are other Nehemiahs in the Bible. So if you looked at a Bible dictionary, this narrows down which Nehemiah. Now it happened in the month of Kislev in the 20th year, as I was in Susa, the citadel. Now that's a great passage for context. I see three prepositional phrases, all starting with the word in. In the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, as I was in Susa, the citadel. Now what's that? What's Kislev? We don't have any Kislev in our months. And the 20th year of what? And where's Susa? And what's a citadel? See, all these questions are full of observations. And if you were to look at your resources, your Bible dictionary and your atlas, or a Bible handbook, you would discover that Kislev is the 9th month of the Jewish calendar. It would be our November or December. So this is winter. It's in that month. Now, in the 20th year, we don't find out till chapter 2, verse 1, which it says in the month of Nisan. So that's a different Jewish month of the calendar. And it's in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. So that's the 20th month. It's in the 20th month of the year King Artaxerxes. So who's he? So you could look up again who he is. He's a Persian king. And so this is, he's marking his, where he's at in Susa. That's a Persian capital. The citadel is a winter capital. There are two capitals in Susa. There's a summer capital and a winter capital. And since this is the winter months, Artaxerxes and Nehemiah are in that winter capital. Verse 11 tells us he was the cupbearer to the king, so he works for this King Artaxerxes. So you're picking up all this context, you're picking up all these observations, and it's interesting too as an observation that he's keeping Jewish calendar even though he's in a Persian capital. That's interesting. And so you can mark off all these ends, these prepositions that give us the when, the where, the who, and the what. All those W questions that we would want to ask. Now verse 2. It was in that time that Hananiah, one of my brothers, so maybe a family member brother, or maybe a spiritual brother, a fellow Jew, probably his real brother, came with certain men from Judah. So remember, we looked at that Sunday. That's in that southern part of Israel, of Palestine, where Jerusalem, the capital, is located. So apparently there's some Jews, some of his family, who's still in Jerusalem, even though he's in Susa. So you could get a map and look at the distance that was and why they would be there. And he asked a question. I asked them concerning the Jews who escaped, who had survived the exile, and concerning Jerusalem. Go ahead and read verse 3. And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed. Verse 4. As soon as I heard these words, so those are the words that he heard, and they came in the context of a question and an answer. And his question as an observation regards people. He says what's going on with the certain Jews who escaped, who had survived the exile, and it has to do with a place, Jerusalem. So he asked about the people, and he asked about the place. And the reason he asked about the place and the people is because they were in exile. So if you would know your history, you would know your correlation of your other books of the Bible, you would know that Nehemiah is living in a time in which the Persians had attacked and plundered Israel and carried off a remnant of them to be slaves and people in Persia. They allowed some of the Jews to stay and operate in that land. And so that's this context. That's these people. That's why some are in Jerusalem, and that's why some are in Susa and Persia. I think it's interesting as an observation. He asks first about people instead of the place. I think it's interesting that they answer in the same order that he asked the question. He asked, how are the people who have survived the exile? They said the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. So there's physical problems, there's emotional problems, there's spiritual shame at this center of the people of God, of Jerusalem, the place that all the other nations are to look to, the people that all the other nations are to look to and say, that's who God is and that's what He's like, and we want to know that God and we want to be like that people. But when they look at Jerusalem and they look at this people because of the exile, because of the wall being broken down and the gates being destroyed by fire, and they're just a remnant, there's shame. We're not operating like we're supposed to operate. We're not the people we're to be. This isn't the place what the place is supposed to be like. And the wall of Jerusalem, what's that say? They're defenseless. What's the gates? Destroyed by fire. That's the center of commerce. So their economy's busted. So Nehemiah hears that, and as soon as he hears it, so his response is immediate. I might also write in verses 1 through 3, by the way, this is the report. Verse 4, here's Nehemiah's response. That would help me sort of organize it. And he does 4 things. He sat down, he wept and mourned, he fasted, and he prayed, all before the God of heaven. I noticed that the sitting down is a physical response. I noticed that the weeping in the morning is an emotional response. And I noticed that the continuing to fast and pray is a spiritual response. So I could point all that out. So you see how there's this imagining myself in the text, there's this observing, there's this collating and organizing and all together. So how many observations did we do right there? See, they're really fast. Do that stuff as much as you can. The more you practice, the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. Still getting responses from you on John 3:16, so keep those coming. My daughter, actually, one of our church members, Franklin Norton, is his Latin teacher. He gave the assignment of John 3:16 and 50 observations to his students as an extra credit thing for an end-of-year exercise. So send those to me. I'd love to give you feedback. I'd love to answer your questions. I know I've gotten a handful personally this past week, but hopefully this is as encouraging to you as it has been for me for the last 15, 20 years now. And I never get tired of doing it. So practice, practice, practice. All right, have a great week.